policeman humiliates a girl by taking away her prosthesis, unaware of who her family is. Olivia had always cherished her visits to Grenwood Park. It was her refuge, a place where she felt at ease. Today, with Liam at her side, she strolled along the paths, the cool breeze sweeping through the trees as they laughed together, lost in conversation. Olivia was accustomed to the curious glances that people threw her way, noticing her prosthetic leg, but today felt different. They had just rounded a corner near the playground when Olivia noticed a tall figure standing in a police uniform, watching her with an intensity that unsettled her. The officer's gaze was fixed on her, specifically on her leg, his face stern. Olivia felt her heart pick up, an unease creeping in that she couldn't quite ignore. Liam noticed her discomfort and looked over, muttering, "What's his problem?" Olivia forced a shrug, though the officer's scrutiny made her feel self-conscious. He approached them, his steps slow, measured. As he neared, Olivia took a deep breath, preparing herself, but his cold, direct voice threw her off. "Can I see some identification?" Confused, Olivia stammered. I don't have any ID with me. I'm just here with my friend." She couldn't understand why he would ask for her identification in the middle of the park. The officer's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking down to her leg. "And what about that prosthetic? Where did you get it?" A chill ran through Olivia. She could barely believe what she was hearing. Liam's eyes widened, and he stepped closer, his presence a quiet but powerful source of support. "Her leg? That's her prosthetic. What kind of question is that?" Ignoring Liam, the officer fixed his stare on Olivia. "I need to know where it came from. Do you have any documents proving it's legally yours?" Stunned, Olivia felt her throat tighten. "No, I don't carry papers for my leg. It's part of me," she managed, her voice trembling. The officer's face hardened. "So you don't have any proof of ownership?" He asked it with such an air of suspicion that Olivia felt small and vulnerable. She couldn't comprehend how something so integral to her could be questioned. But the officer's gaze remained unyielding, his tone cold. "If you can't provide any documentation, I'll have to take it in for verification." Liam's face turned pale. "You can't be serious. That's her leg." Unmoved, the officer reached down, gripping the strap that secured the prosthetic. Olivia tried to pull back, a surge of panic rising within her, but his grip was firm, his expression impassive. As he unfastened her leg, she felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. Strangers passing by began to slow, some watching, others murmuring in surprise. With her prosthetic in hand, the officer straightened, holding it as though it were a confiscated item, something disconnected from her. Olivia wobbled, standing on one leg, her face flushed with shame and anger. Liam was by her side in an instant, supporting her, his face a mask of fury. "Give it back to her," he demanded, but the officer ignored him, turning and walking away. The crowd's eyes were glued to Olivia, some with pity, others with confusion. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, but quickly brushed it away, unwilling to let the officer see her cry. She looked around, seeing people pulling out phones, recording her, and her cheeks burned hotter. Back at home, Olivia sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where her prosthetic should have been. Her father David paced the room, his fists clenched, fury written plainly across his face as she haltingly recounted the incident. The humiliation of standing there, exposed and vulnerable, while the officer took away a part of her, had left her feeling raw and shattered. David's expression grew darker with each word she spoke. "That officer had no right," he muttered, more to himself than to her, "to treat you like that, to take something so personal. It's monstrous." Olivia nodded, her fingers twisting in her lap as she fought to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. She wanted to tell her dad she was fine, that it would all be okay, but the words were stuck in her throat. The memory of standing there in the park, one-legged, vulnerable, was burned into her mind. No matter how many times she closed her eyes, she could still feel the cold gaze of the officer, hear his dismissive tone as he questioned her. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered, barely audible. "He made me feel like I was something wrong." David knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his own. "Listen to me, Olivia," he said, his voice steady but filled with a fierce warmth. "You are not wrong. You are perfect exactly as you are, and nobody has the right to make you feel otherwise." She nodded, but the shame and anger lingered. She didn't want her father to see how deeply the incident had shaken her, but her hands trembled slightly in his grasp. Just then, the doorbell rang. David stood up, his expression stormy, and went to answer it. When he opened the door, a familiar face greeted them. It was Alex Rivera, David's oldest friend and a respected journalist known for his commitment to justice. Alex had always been a trusted family friend, someone Olivia had looked up to for his integrity and dedication to exposing the truth. Alex's gaze softened with concern as he looked at her. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "Are you okay?" Olivia managed a nod, though the word okay felt hollow. She appreciated Alex's concern, but the weight of what had happened hung heavily in her chest. Alex turned to David, his face hardening with quiet anger. "This is outrageous," he said. "That officer had no right to treat you like this, Olivia, and we're not going to let him get away with it." David nodded, his arms crossed over his chest. "We're filing a formal complaint. I want this to go public. People need to know what's happening and the kind of prejudice that exists." Alex agreed, already pulling out his notebook. "I'll look into it, see if there are other cases. If anyone else has experienced this, we'll find them, and we'll make sure the public knows what happened." As David and Alex discussed their plan, Olivia sat quietly, absorbing their words. A strange mix of emotions stirred within her: gratitude for their support, fear of the attention this would bring, and a lingering sense of shame she couldn't shake. She didn't want to be the center of a controversy, and the thought of reliving that horrible experience over and over was daunting. But deep down, she knew that standing up against this injustice was the right thing to do, not just for herself, but for others who might face similar prejudice. When Alex left that evening, Olivia felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps, just maybe, they could make a difference. In the days that followed, the news of the incident spread quickly. Alex published an article detailing the officer's actions, and the story captured people's attention. Conversations erupted online and in the community, and strangers left messages of support, sharing words of encouragement. Although she appreciated their support, Olivia felt an uneasy weight settling in as her story spread. She couldn't escape the pitying glances, the whispers in the school hallways. Some looked at her with admiration, others with barely concealed pity. She hated the pity. It reminded her of that feeling of vulnerability, of being seen as less than whole. At school, she found herself bombarded by mixed reactions. Some students approached her with hesitant words of support, while others, influenced by their own biases or their parents' opinions, treated her with hostility. One day, as she walked through the hall, a boy named Tyler, known for his tendency to bully, blocked her path. "So, you think you're some kind of hero now?" he sneered, his eyes narrowing as he looked her up and down. Olivia stiffened, her cheeks flushing. "I'm just standing up for myself," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Tyler scoffed. "Right, sure you are. People like you just want to be victims, don't you?" The words stung, cutting deeper than she expected. She wanted to defend herself, but the weight of everything she had endured left her feeling drained. She forced herself to walk past him, ignoring the mocking laughter that followed her down the hallway. That evening, she collapsed onto her bed, exhaustion and frustration pressing down on her. She felt trapped, caught between her desire to stand up for herself and the overwhelming urge to retreat from the spotlight entirely. David found her later, curled up on her bed, her face buried in her pillow. He sat beside her, rubbing her back gently, offering silent comfort as she finally let the tears flow. It was the first time she had allowed herself to cry since the incident, and there was a strange relief in letting go. "You're stronger than you think, Olivia," he whispered, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "And you're not alone in this. We're all here for you, everyone who believes in you. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Olivia nodded, the last of her tears drying as she took a shaky breath. She knew he was right. She wasn't alone, and she wasn't weak. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to give up now. The next few days felt like a blur as Olivia and her family braced themselves for what was to come. The local news picked up the story, and soon, the small town of Meadowbrook was buzzing with conversation. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, and not all of them were kind. Olivia began receiving messages from strangers online. Some offered heartfelt support, while others sent hateful words, accusing her of exaggerating the incident for attention. Despite the strain, David was determined not to back down. He had already filed a formal complaint, and Alex's articles continued to shed light on the officer's actions. People were starting to rally behind her, and even a small protest formed outside the Riverdale District Court, with signs demanding justice and accountability. Olivia watched it all unfold from the relative safety of her home, unsure how to feel about the attention. On one hand, the support felt validating, like people finally understood the injustice she had faced. But on the other, the constant scrutiny made her feel exposed, like every part of her life was open for public judgment. Alex soon discovered a troubling pattern of behavior in Officer Grant's record. Through interviews and investigations, he uncovered complaints from other individuals who had experienced harassment or discrimination. The evidence painted a stark picture. Grant's actions were not an isolated incident, but part of a troubling pattern that had been overlooked for far too long. One evening, as they gathered around the kitchen table, Alex spread out his findings. "There's a history here," he said, his tone grim. "This officer has used his authority to intimidate people, particularly those he perceives as different or vulnerable." Olivia's heart sank as she listened, realizing that what she had endured was part of a larger issue. "Do you think he's done this to others like me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex nodded solemnly. "It's very likely, and that's why this is so important, Olivia. By standing up, you're helping expose something that needs to change." His words filled her with a sense of purpose. This wasn't just her fight. It was a fight for everyone who had been silenced, everyone who had been made to feel less than. She took a deep breath, feeling a flicker of determination that she hadn't felt since the day in the park. The weeks that followed were challenging. Olivia faced more hostility at school, with some students questioning her motives and others avoiding her entirely. One afternoon, she overheard a classmate mocking her, saying she was just looking for attention. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to walk away, but inside, a new resolve grew stronger. She wouldn't let them silence her. As the trial date approached, Olivia met with their lawyer, who helped her prepare for what would undoubtedly be the hardest experience of her young life. Together, they went over her testimony, rehearsing every detail, every question. David and Alex were by her side, offering words of encouragement. "You've already made a difference, Olivia," her father said, his voice filled with pride. "You've shown more courage than most people could ever imagine." The day of the trial arrived, and Olivia found herself standing outside the courthouse, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She knew that inside, Officer Grant would be sitting just a few feet away from her, that she would have to relive every painful moment. But as she looked around, she saw the faces of those who had come to support her, her father, Alex, even a few of her teachers and friends. Their presence gave her strength, and she walked into the courthouse with her head held high. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Journalists filled the room, and the buzz of whispered conversations quieted as the judge entered. Olivia felt a chill run through her as she looked across the room and saw Officer Grant sitting stiffly, his face expressionless. When the trial began, she listened as the prosecutor laid out the case, describing the officer's actions as an abuse of power driven by prejudice. The defense, on the other hand, painted a different picture, attempting to justify his actions as a matter of protocol. Then it was her turn to take the stand. She felt every eye in the courtroom on her as she walked up, her heart pounding. The prosecutor's questions were gentle, guiding her through the events of that day in the park. She spoke carefully, recounting each detail, the officer's cold tone, the way he had unfastened her prosthetic, the humiliation of standing there, one-legged, as strangers looked on. As she spoke, she felt her voice waver, but she pressed on, refusing to let the emotion overwhelm her. She was determined to tell her truth, to stand up for herself, no matter how hard it was. When the prosecutor finished, the defense attorney rose, his tone condescending. He questioned her motives, suggesting that she had exaggerated the incident for attention. But Olivia met his gaze steadily, refusing to let him undermine her. "I didn't ask for this attention," she said firmly. I just want to make sure no one else has to go through what I did." Her words hung in the air, and she could see the attorney's smug expression falter. He quickly moved on to another line of questioning, but Olivia held her ground, answering each question with calm determination. She had come too far to back down now. When Officer Grant took the stand, his expression remained impassive as he defended his actions, claiming he had simply been following procedure. But as he spoke, the prosecutor pressed him on his motivations, bringing up the evidence Alex had uncovered. Each piece painted a damning picture of a man who had used his authority to target those he saw as weak or different. Finally, the prosecutor asked the question that had lingered throughout the trial. "Officer Grant, isn't it true that you acted out of personal bias, that you targeted Miss Martin, not because of any legitimate concern, but because of your own prejudice?" Grant's face tightened, and for a moment he hesitated. Then, in a rare moment of anger, he snapped, "People like her think they're entitled, that they deserve special treatment just because they're different." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Olivia felt a surge of disbelief, followed by a deep, simmering anger. Grant's words had exposed the truth of his actions, revealing the bias that had driven him. The judge's face hardened, and with that final, damning statement, the trial moved toward its conclusion. When the verdict was announced, Olivia felt a wave of relief and exhaustion wash over her. Officer Grant was found guilty of misconduct and abuse of power, and the court ordered a full investigation into his actions. As she left the courthouse, surrounded by supporters and reporters, she felt a sense of closure. Justice had been served, and she could finally move forward. In the days that followed, Olivia became something of a symbol in her community. People approached her with words of encouragement, and others shared their own stories of discrimination. Inspired by her experience, she and her father decided to start an organization dedicated to supporting those who faced prejudice and injustice. Together with Alex, they began working to provide resources and advocacy for others who felt voiceless. Months later, as Olivia stood in Greenwood Park during a community event, she looked around at the people who had come to support her cause. She realized that her journey had not only changed her, but had also ignited a spark in others. With her father and Alex by her side, Olivia knew that they were building something that would last. Something that would help others find their strength and reclaim their dignity. And as she watched the sun set over the park, she felt a deep, yet unshakable resolve. She had faced her fears, found her voice, and proved to herself and the world that she was stronger than anyone could have imagined. This was just the beginning, and she was ready for whatever lay ahead.